No, 19. So today we're going to do, sorry, let's just do that again.
I knew you couldn't resist doing that.
I know, it's because you said it. I'm going to do it again. Coming up, it's birthday Q&A day. Hello and welcome to IDCOM's MediaSnack episode 19. So today we are going to do which we announced last week, we're going to do another special. We thought we'd just do a Q&A. Mm-hmm. We celebrated as a business, we celebrated our 7th birthday last week. And we thought it was appropriate just to perhaps take the opportunity to answer some questions and just pan back and have a bit of a more general perspective of the industry. So we reached out across various different platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn, Snapchat, asking for questions, and we got quite a lot in, which we've sorted now.
They're really interesting as well.
And some very good questions, and some very tricky questions actually, which is good. So let's get straight into them.
Get stuck in.
Okay.
Who are the advertisers you most admire for getting media right?
So generally speaking, the advertisers that we most respect, I think, probably for doing media really, really well, they start with a very clear media ambition. Yep. So they kind of galvanize their marketing departments around a very clear ambition for media. From that, they're able to define internally what the role of media is. Yeah. And therefore are very clear in their expectations of their media agencies, and they provide them with very clear KPIs, and they measure those KPIs really, really clearly. Yeah. So basically media sits at the heart of their kind of marketing organizations, which frankly is where we believe it should sit.
Yeah, and we see, it's surprising actually the amount of brands sometimes that we might have opportunity to speak to. And when you say, why do you spend $400 million on media? So what actually is it, what is it designed to do? Why do you allocate that money? Not often do brands have a really clear, simple answer to a very simple question, which tells you a couple of things. One is that they haven't really necessarily thought about it, and sometimes budgets are just set same as last year plus inflation. And so they're not being linked to driving a business metric clearly, because it's not seen as an investment. It's seen as a lump of money which you have to distribute and spend. And that's a dangerous position to be in, because it makes you not treat it like an investment, not expect a return, not measure its effect, and maybe it doesn't make you care about that money as much, we find. So brands that really have a vision for media, who know why they spend the money that they spend, but actually don't view it as a spend, they view it as an investment in the business because it's driving something that they can measure. They then tend to care about that money a bit more, and they'll therefore care more about the relationship with their agency, the quality of the work. And so those are the brands that we tend to admire the most. So they've got an idea of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and also, I mean, those brands that perhaps don't have such a clear vision on media, but have an ambition for understanding that and are willing to go through that process, use that as an opportunity to raise media, I think, really high on the corporate agenda. Because they have to get so many stakeholders aligned on that particular direction and strategy. So those are the brands that we generally find are best placed to really over-deliver when it comes to media.
What's the one thing a client should learn about if they learn about nothing else in media?
That's a really good question, actually, and quite a difficult one to answer. We've been thinking about this. I think the biggest opportunity to learn one thing, to understand one thing in the media market, is the difference between price and value. And I think if you understand that, it changes your whole perspective on what media is and what it does. Largely the industry is obsessed with the price of media. And going back to our previous question, if you think about spending your budget, if you just have to spend money, then you want to just spend it as wide as possible. So you want the cheapest possible price. But that is not effective media. That doesn't do anything.
That's right.
It's not linked to any kind of outcome. If you change your mindset to think about the value of media, then you start to question what is it actually doing? If I'm buying something and I want it to create a result, that's considered more like an investment.
Yeah.
And if I have an outcome in mind and I'm measuring something, it starts to determine the value of media rather than price. And so I obsess less about discount by cheaper reach, which in our mind is a race to the bottom. And actually think about buying the things that drive an outcome and get smarter about the value that media has to your business.
I agree. So understanding what the greatest levers are for business growth, whatever those business metrics and KPIs
and they'll be different for every.
Of course,
for every
absolutely.
brand.
But understanding the power of your media channels and those levers to drive whatever KPIs you've got is a critical component of any kind of marketing and media director's scope, I would say, because then he can provide greater guidance to the agency and continually drive incremental improvement in not only the media delivery but also business performance.
Exactly, and that reframes the role of media in the organisation.
That's right.
What's the competitive advantage in terms of effectiveness and efficiency if an advertiser did everything that IDComs believe brands should do?
It's a really good question.
I love this question.
Good. Competitive advantage in media, as we see it, is making your media investment disproportionately more effective, powerful than any other brand within your category.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, minimizing the wastage of that media investment to provide you with media competitive advantage over, your competition.
Yeah.
Is the way that we would define it, I think.
Yeah, and everybody's competing.
Yeah.
Their metrics might be different, but they all want growth and they want sales and whatever it is. And so most brands are competing in their category. And I think that's a lovely kind of ambition to have, is to try and make your media work harder than anyone else in the category. And it has such a simple, logical follow-on. Because if you can make your media work harder by understanding the value, right, the stuff that you should be doing that drives an outcome, not just spending money wildly, trying to find kind of cheap media, drives your business, then if I can spend less media money than you to sell the same,
That's right.
it makes my marketing more profitable ultimately, and it gives me a larger margin on what I do, and I can pass it on to the customer, and I can sell my product cheaper than your product and grow even more. So when we talk about media developing competitive advantage, it has an amazing, powerful knock-on. If you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in media and you can make that work 20-30% harder, that either gives you a big chunk of additional money to do something new,
Absolutely.
Or it means that you can put that back against your bottom line, and happy days, I'm a much more efficient and effective company, and that sets me in a great position for the future. I mean, a lot of our observation is that media money, substantial amounts of media money potentially are wasted because it's not given the right discipline and diligence in the way that it's applied as an investment for growth.
Absolutely. And the companies that do it really well obsess about that. They obsess about finding those incremental improvements in their media delivery to give them that competitive advantage.
Yeah.
As a growing business, what is your greatest challenge?
So our biggest challenge, I think, at the moment, and it will continue probably to be a challenge moving forward, is getting the right talent into the business. As we grow, we will require more and more talent to come in, and finding people that reflect our values and that can kind of work within our culture and to our culture, while still having that bit of entrepreneurial spark that I think you need to work in a fast-growing business like ours is always a little bit challenging. But when we get it right, they flourish and thrive, I think, within our environment.
I think talent is. I mean, the amount of conversations at the moment going on around talent in the industry, whether that be on the marketer side or agency side, vendor side, everybody's really struggling with it. And it's a cliche a little bit to say that there's there's a talent famine. I think it's definitely a challenge in the agencies because a lot of talent has been drawn into the tech side or the vendor publisher side over recent years. So I think they've struggled with that, and I hear from agencies they're struggling with, hiring really high caliber graduates who can't necessarily see a career progression through an agency because it's a very young culture. It's quite kind of flat bottomed culture, isn't it? So they've struggled with that, and as you say, then we've got particular requirements on talent because we need to have a very broad perspective on the client, the agency, the performance, the vendor side, and that is a challenge.
And I when we look for talent and we bring people in, we're not necessarily looking for somebody that ticks all those boxes. More than anything else, I think we look for somebody that has that little bit of a spark, that sense of curiosity, that sense of interest within the industry, that will allow them to be hungry for information, will allow them to grow as we grow as a business. So we're always looking for great talent. And
apply below.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the other thing, it's related to this, but I think that the other challenge for us, a bit more strategically as a business, is that the industry is so fast paced, it's so fast changing. And if you think that 2 or 3 years ago, the plans that we might have had for the business or what we thought we would do, then get slightly nudged other ways, of course, by the demands of our customers, who are some of the world's largest advertisers. Their demands, we have to try and anticipate what they are and build towards that. And we're quite agile as a small business, and that's good, but that's our challenge. As we grow, we've got to keep flexible and really listen to what's out there and make sure that we're always kind of one step ahead and anticipating the needs of marketers. And that's the other bit, because it's hard to plan resource and talent against that when you're not always quite sure where you're aiming.
If you were building an agency, A, what would it look like? B, would you call it an agency?
I like that question, and people ask that question quite a lot. I think because we've got, we're in a rather privileged position because we get to see under the hood of all the agencies through when we do work on pitches or negotiating on behalf of advertisers with agencies. So perhaps we've got a perspective to say, well, what would we build from that? I think what I typically say is that the landscape as it exists right now of media agencies is big scale network leverage, right? And that has fitted and suited a purpose for a long time. And those networks represent, they control 90% of the world's media investment. So you can say that is the favored model right now. I think the limitations of that, though, is that they operate on an industrial scale, and they maybe don't have enough craft of media, maybe they don't care or have a passion perhaps for media, not as individuals, but just as a big business. It's just difficult to do that. And I think that there are plenty of brands out there who may not necessarily need the scale, but that would like to work with companies that have a specific talent or a specific angle and could be slightly more nuanced. When you're running a big global network agency, try as you might, it's very difficult, I think, to have a really clear set of values or a point of view, perspective on something, or a positioning, because you have to appeal to a very wide spectrum of different companies and cultures. And so, the big network agencies are often accused of all looking and feeling the same, and that's unfair perhaps on one hand, but you can understand that because they have to be pretty vanilla. They've got to be, they need mass appeal. But I think the brands, increasingly, and I hope this is the case, I feel quite passionate and romantic about this, is that brands may want to work with media agencies that really stand for something, that really have a point of view or an angle on the industry or a specialism, or a perspective of how brands build or businesses grow. And so I think if I was to start an agency, I would be proud for it to be quite boutique. It doesn't have to be niche, but it has to have a specific point of view. And that to me would be a competitive advantage versus a big agency network who I wouldn't want to, I don't want to build the world's biggest network. It's not interesting.
I agree. And actually it's the success stories of recent years in terms of independent agencies certainly in the UK have been built around a really clear position and a really clear culture that underpins everything that they do. And so I agree with you. I think that it's very difficult to distinguish one of the big networks from each other. I think that's just the nature of the beast. But there is a massive market, I think, there for a really smart, culturally driven, independent, collection of agencies.
Yeah, agree. Would they be called agencies?
Probably.
I think you'd be regarded as agencies.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'd be that interested in the buying. I mean, it might be interesting to, I think there's an education that needs to happen to encourage brands to pay for insight, strategy and planning. And so it might feel a little bit perhaps more like a consulting business, an extension of a consulting business, to think about those things without going into a buying arrangement. At the moment, those kind of split models haven't really succeeded very much where they've been tried, but perhaps in future, as brands increasingly value, talent that can distill insight from all their data, build proper strategies, and write, guidelines and principles for how that can be executed. Maybe that's a scope.
Yeah.
We're designing an agency right now. Okay, we'll get back to the day job.
Next.
If clients were to pay more for media services, would rebates disappear? And would this be a good thing?
So, still talking about rebates and transparency. Never seems to go away.
No.
Would rebates disappear if more clients paid more fees and fairly? No, they wouldn't go away completely, because I think kind of the rebate model is just part of the volume structure of most buying arrangements. Would, however, the transparency concerns or the lack of transparency that is, drowning, I think, the industry? Yes, it would, because the issues around transparency would be less prevalent. I think if agencies were earning, or were fairly remunerated for the work that they did, there would also be, I think, probably more adult discussions around rebates. So that would hopefully result in a greater trust-based relationship with clients, and we'd be able to move forward. So perhaps that is the solution. But would rebates go away completely? No, I don't think.
Because there will always be that. There'll always be that incentive, whether it's called a rebate, technically or not, but some incentive paid to a buyer to incentivize them to buy more. That will exist. The distinction is to what extent that's shared back with the client, and then the agency disclose where that exists, which they used to have to do, and they were very fully disclosed, and it's just becoming harder and harder to track those things. And so you're right. I mean, it just comes down to the way you pay the agency. That's the absolute determinant, isn't it, of how transparent they want to be about passing back any of those benefits.
And if we were to take away the whole, lack of transparency piece, then, as we've found from our study, trust would become stronger, and everybody would benefit from that.
Yeah, and actually, it's good you referenced the study there, because that was one of the highest ranked elements from all the respondents that we had, to say that how the agency actually makes money is one of the biggest questions they have, and a determinant of the transparency, and as a determinant of trust they have in that agency. That at the moment is a little bit of a grey area that could easily be resolved potentially if maybe if they got paid more fairly by the brands they work for.
Absolutely.
Right, we've got just time for one final question.
Yeah.
What is the least transparent holding company?
Good question.
It's a very good question.
Do you have an answer?
You take it.
I think it's an easy question, easy answer, isn't it? Because the least transparent holding company, as everybody knows, is